All right.
I couldn't go.
I think we're just about ready to get started.
Yeah.
If you came for metadata management, essential tips for publishers, you're in the right place. We're going to be doing a panel, so as part of this, we will have some introductions from me. My name is Christopher Hill. I work for RSI Content Solutions, and we make a content management software. You can visit us in the exhibit hall if you want to learn more about what I do. Metadata is a part or an aspect of what my customers deal with in a pretty major way in most organizations. So we'll be looking at some of that, and I'll share some of my experience from just working with projects and customers that are actually implementing metadata type solutions. So that'll be my starting point, and then we'll have each panelist come up and they will give you a 5 to 10 minute kind of overview of their take on metadata. You're going to see some pretty different and unique perspectives, I think, in this presentation. So I'm really pleased that each panelist kind of has their own sort of angle on the subject of metadata. After that, we'll turn it into a discussion. So we have a bunch of questions that I can ask. You're welcome to raise your hand and ask questions at that point, and we'll see how these guys improvise on that. So that's the overall agenda. Our panelists today, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we have John Shaw from Sage Publications, Sarah Fleming from the New England Journal of Medicine, Guillaume Mazieres, am I saying your last name?
Pretty good.
Close.
Pretty good.
From Temis, they're one of our software partners, and Craig Journey from Highwire Press. And some of these people you may already know. They certainly are prominent in the area of metadata. I want to start the discussion just by talking a bit about metadata's many uses. One of the things that people tend to get a little intimidated with the word metadata. Usually when I approach it, I say, well, everyone does metadata. If you use iTunes and you try to search for songs you like, you're using metadata. If you have old photos, family photos, and they wrote those little inky things in the margins, that's metadata. And so really metadata isn't that much of a mystery, but it really has a ton of applications, especially when you talk about digital publishing. So a couple of good examples today you're going to see is how a customer experience is enhanced. Either your readers or someone you're trying to connect with content that you provide through the use of metadata. And you've all had this experience if you've shopped on Amazon.com. You're using their metadata all the time to try to find and narrow down your searches. Discovery is an important aspect of metadata. How do I not only find the thing I'm looking for, but how do I serendipitously stumble into things maybe I didn't know that I wondered about or that I had a need for. So discovery can be really enhanced through metadata. Production processes. If you don't have good metadata on your production processes, you probably don't have great control over the production process. So knowing who has some piece of content or who's responsible for something or who signed off on this or what are the rights we have to even use this image on in our publication or on our website. Those are all sort of production metadata that becomes very important. There's a whole area around formally organizing content, and a lot of people are familiar with putting things into folders. You might create a folder and subfolders and arrange your hard drive that way. Well, those folders really are carrying metadata with them, and the names you give those folders are important, presumably, to how you're categorizing or classifying a piece of content. Well, the same thing is true when you move into a larger, more robust solution than folders. You can start categorizing content across different disciplines or at different angles for different types of users. One of the things we'll be talking a bit about later is how metadata isn't just a flat, static thing that you assign once and walk away from. It really is a living thing if you want it to truly be effective in your distribution of content. Content carries metadata in its very existence. So the resolution of a photo can be considered metadata about the photo. There's all sorts of properties that you can glean from just a piece of content without actually having to have anybody do any formal tagging. And some of that information can be highly useful. Data analysis is something that some publishers are starting to get more into, which is running queries across your entire collection of content and being able to determine how much content do we have in category X or category Y. I worked with a publisher actually out of France that had a ton of content, general purpose magazine type content. And we did some semantic processing with a previous job that I was in and found out that they had tons of content about video games. They didn't have any publications targeting video games. And what they did is they set up a channel on their website to focus on video games that was fed largely through the metadata that was kind of a side effect of their normal publishing. And then interoperability, being able to have my content work with other people's content or information exchange, whether that's formal or informal. So having my content exist in a context of the entire world of content available to someone can be a very useful technique for connecting users and creating a more engaging experience for your consumers. And the keys to that we'll be seeing a lot of detail on at the very tail end of the presentation. So I'll leave that for now. One of the things that people make a real mistake on when actually setting up systems and processes for metadata is really making some assumptions that I think are completely wrong in many cases. There was a tendency when implementing metadata solutions to say, oh, okay, we're going to predefine all our metadata. We're going to have a big meeting. I'm going to get everybody together. We're all going to argue over which fields we think are most important, and the production people are going to argue with the marketing people because they're going to have a totally different view of this stuff. And if you end up in long discussions like that where you end up in an impasse, you're probably making some assumptions here that are incorrect. Saying that your metadata is always predictable, that they're universal, that all the fields of metadata that you want to apply to a piece of content apply to everybody in the organization. I could care less about some of the f-stop or the aperture settings of the camera that was used to take a photo, because I don't even know what any of that means. But I might care a great deal about the content of the photo. What is this a picture of? Another thing that seems to happen a lot in organizations is to take a real top-down approach with metadata. To say we're going to go from above and dictate to the organization what metadata they're required to fill in. That's partially applicable, and that can be effective for some parts of metadata, but unless you also acknowledge a bigger world than that, you're probably missing out on a lot of valuable metadata. Assuming that your metadata is static. A lot of times metadata enrichment is stuck into the workflow of creating the content, and then once it's created, nobody has a real strategy for what to do after that. So these are important things that really limit the way organizations are able to deliver and create compelling content experiences. So really, in reality, you have unpredictable metadata requirements. You don't know for sure what metadata is going to be important a year from now, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now. I was pleased to see that we have an example of some content that's 200 years old that's being delivered through these web systems. So don't assume that you set it and forget it. Dynamic. This should be a living and breathing process. Metadata should be something in an organization that you look at not only on the production side, but then on the life cycle, the overall end-to-end life cycle of the content. How are we going to continue to make our metadata relevant and interesting? So with that short introduction, I want to bring in each panelist and give them a few minutes to give you their perspective on how they're using, or at least some aspects of how they're using metadata. And then once all four of them have finished, we'll open it up for questions. So be thinking about each panelist and maybe some interesting things that you would be interested in hearing from them. So first we have John.